If you're looking to achieve a weight loss goal and lose belly fat without counting calories, taking a look at your dinner is a really easy place to make some huge progress. Today I'm sharing 10 different super easy dinner swaps that you can implement right now in order to tap into fat burning mechanisms and achieve your wellness dreams. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science back and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. Okay, so each of these tips revolves around the very basic premise of how our body actually utilizes fat as fuel. And this means that we're going to be looking at the types of foods that influence the storing hormone insulin. Insulin is our fat storing hormone, which means that when insulin is high, fat burning or the process called lipolysis is shut off. And when insulin is lower, that means fat burning or lipolysis is turned back on. Now the types of foods that really strongly influence insulin are going to be foods that are very high in starch or very high in sugar and very low in fiber. Which brings me to my first swap, and that's to swap out rice for cauliflower rice. Rice, even brown rice, is extremely high in starches, very low in fiber, which means that you're really going to get that big surge in insulin when you eat rice. Just 1 cup of cooked rice has around 44 grams of net carbohydrates. Now, if you compare that to cauliflower rice, it only has 2 grams of those net carbohydrates. And you can essentially swap out rice for cauliflower rice in nearly every recipe that calls for rice. In fact, one of my favorite ways to use cauliflower rice is with my cauliflower rice burrito bowl. This is featured for my complete intermittent fasting program, but I also have a blog post where I share the recipe. I'll have that listed down in the description below so you guys can check that out. Number 2, swap out chickpeas for lentils. Chickpeas are going to be higher in starch and lower in protein compared to lentils. 1/2 cup serving of cooked lentils has around 14 grams of carbohydrates and 9 grams of protein, while the equivalent amount of chickpeas has 16 grams of carbohydrates and only 7 grams of protein. And protein helps to slow the release of the glucose into the blood supply, which helps to keep that insulin level more stable, which means that lentils have a double win over chickpeas here. Higher in the proteins, that's going to slow down the release of the glucose into the blood supply, and it's lower in the carbohydrates that are going to cause insulin to spike. Number 3, swap out a low protein meal for a moderate protein meal. Moderate or higher protein meals have been found to increase satiety, which means that it's going to help you feel more full, more satisfied, and prevent those sugar cravings later on. Protein has also been found to be hugely beneficial for body composition and weight loss goals. So that means a lower protein meal is going to have less of a positive effect on body composition, and it's not going to make you feel as satisfied. I always like to tell my clients and A and peeps to always consider where's my protein source coming from whenever you're looking at your dinner. Some of my personal favorite proteins include eggs, beef, chicken, halloumi. I'm working on salmon. If you guys have followed me on Instagram, you know I'm working on liking salmon. It's getting there. And if you're curious on what your protein needs should be, I have a video that breaks this down right here. Okay, number 4, swap out pasta for zucchini noodles or spaghetti squash. Now pasta, just like the rice, is going to have a lot more starches and a lot less fiber that's going to cause a really big spike in insulin, the storing hormone. Just 1 cup of cooked pasta is going to have around 41 grams of net carbohydrates. Now, if you look at that compared to an equivalent amount of spaghetti squash, that comes in at only around 6 grams of net carbohydrates. Some of my personal favorite ways to use things like spaghetti squash or zucchini noodles is to make pretty much the same sauces you would use for just regular pasta, but put it with the spaghetti squash. I have a really amazing spaghetti squash bolognese recipe. Oh my gosh, that's in my latest cookbook. I'll have that link down in the description below so you guys can check that out. Okay, number 5, swap out breadcrumbs and use almond flour or coconut flour instead. This is a really easy swap to significantly drop down the starch content of your meal without really changing your meal. And so you get an idea of the impact of this swap. A 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs comes in at around 20 grams of net carbohydrates. And if you compare this to an equivalent amount of almond flour, this will come in at only 2 grams of net carbohydrates. So almond flour has 10 times less the carbohydrates that breadcrumbs will have. And if you want something that's a little bit more crunchy, like if you're used to using panko, then you can just make sure that you chop up almonds instead of using the ground almond flour. In fact, I make my own chicken fingers, Cajun chicken fingers, where I use almond flour and coconut flour. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Eventually I'll get around to sharing that recipe too. Okay, number 6, swap your stevia soda out for sparkling water. I've noticed that stevia or monk fruit flavored sodas have really become popular lately because it seems like they shouldn't really have an impact on your insulin levels and therefore it should be a good weight loss tool. However, there has been some research on how stevia or monk fruit can still produce an insulin response and therefore could still have your body shift into fat storing mode instead of fat burning. I have a whole video where I break down more of the scientific details on this if you want to check that out right here. Instead, I personally like to use just plain sparkling water, or I'll use Spindrift, which is a really good brand if you want a little bit of flavor, or you can also add lime to your sparkling water. Topo Chico's gotten really popular lately as well. Okay, number 7, if you drink wine, make sure it's dry farm. Something really interesting I learned about the wine industry or the alcohol industry is that you don't have to disclose the ingredients you're using, or even the amounts, which means that a lot of wine companies can really add in a lot of sugar and not have to tell you how much they're adding in. And sugar sweetened drinks are one of the leading causes of obesity in America, which makes sense because you're essentially getting a huge infusion of glucose that's really going to spike your insulin levels. But dry farm wines are naturally going to be low in sugar, and they also don't add in sugar in the process. With dry farm wines, they're also fully fermenting their wine, which means that there's not left behind sugars in the wine either. And if you're looking for a dry farm wine, many wines from Italy still follow this dry farm practice. There's also brands like Dry Farm Wines where they send you a monthly supply of wines that are picked out as specifically being dry farm and low in sugar. Okay, number 8, swap a late dinner for an earlier one. Researchers are finding that we're actually going to be more insulin resistant later in the evening, which could hinder weight loss results if you're eating a late night meal. Now, if your schedule allows for it, try and have your meal a little bit earlier in the evening. For example, if you typically eat dinner around 9:30 p.m., try having it 8 p.m. instead. I personally typically have my dinner around 6:30, 6-ish p.m. Okay, number 9, remove the after dinner snack and instead actually eat until you're full and satisfied at dinner. Eating more of the right types of things can really prevent that late night snack urge, which that late night snack is typically going to be something that's rich in sugar anyway, something that's really going to drive up insulin levels. And one really easy way to do this is focusing on the high quality proteins that really bump up satiety. Number 10, swap a high sugar dessert for a low sugar option. If you must have dessert, which happens to all of us, it does happen on the occasion, just make sure it's an option that's not going to really spike your insulin levels. And there are a lot of really great low sugar dessert options that you could implement. For example, instead of a chocolate chip cookie, try having dark chocolate, or instead of ice cream, try having unsweetened heavy whipping cream with berries. In fact, if you're curious on what you can still have that's low sugar dessert and still keep you in line with your weight loss goals, highly recommend that you check out this video with this recipe next. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love the science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.